tossers have thrown it out the door with their behaviour this week. They should be ashamed of themselves. They should absolutely look at themselves in the mirror and wonder what the have they been doing. They were hissing at us and calling us cheats in the Lord's long room, and they have the gall to say, talk to us about the spirit of cricket. Absolute bullshit. There's a big appeal, it's hit him on the pad, he's out! Lions gone, New South Wales are 9 down! Onto Sydney Road, and it hit a car! Oh, I think it's hit a car! What a way to bring up your 50!
All you want is to leave it all behind. Now there is a simple remedy to stay fit for all eternity.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. Happy New Year, everybody. This is the first episode for 2026. And that's right, Cricket Unfiltered is not a way of life. It's just a podcast that loves cricket, and we love talking about cricket. And boy, do we have a lot to talk about in the lead up to the Sydney Test. So Usman Khawaja did a quite incredible press conference yesterday at the Sydney Cricket Ground. I was lucky enough to be there. It was 50 minutes, one of the more mind-blowing press conferences I've ever attended. So we're going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about Steve Smith and the preview of the SCG test. A few comments by him today. We are yet to get a team, so we won't know right up until play gets underway tomorrow who Australia are going to pick. And Australia have announced their T20 World Cup squad since I last recorded, so I want to go through that. So lots to talk about on this episode of Cricket Unfiltered. So as I said, Usman Khawaja announced his retirement yesterday at the Sydney Cricket Ground. It was an 8:15 a.m. press conference. His family were there, and it was quite the occasion. He spoke for, as I said, 50 minutes. He went through a range of topics from the situation in Palestine to the way he's been treated as a cricketer right throughout his career. But let's start with him talking about his retirement and when he decided. Have a listen to this clip.
I knew there was a chance I could play on. I know Andrew Mendel, even to the right to the very end when I told him a few days ago. I mean, he was still thinking about how I could get to India. So I'm glad I get to leave on my own terms with a little bit of dignity and go out at the SCG where I love. But I think the start of the series was a pretty tough time, and then going into Adelaide and then not being picked initially for that game was probably a sign for me to say, all right, it's time to move on.
Yeah, it definitely was the right time for Usman Khawaja to move on. He said that Andrew McDonald had mentioned him staying on till India, but also that last summer against India, after that series, McDonald had pleaded with Khawaja to stay on and play in Sri Lanka and then in the World Test Championship final. And look, I've had my criticisms of Khawaja. I think his best years as a batter ended a little while ago. Obviously, he's almost 40, but you have to say in this series, in the few innings he's played, he has looked pretty good. He has contributed. And one thing I've always said about Khawaja, which I think in all the talk about modern batting and all the criticism after the Melbourne Test, I think a few of the Australian batters would be prudent to look at Khawaja's method. It's very simple. Since he's come back into the Australian side 4 years ago, he's been a lot more judicious with his stroke play outside off stump. He's made bowlers bowl at him more, and he's eliminated those loose dismissals outside off stump, a bit like Steve Waugh did. So you have to say, despite probably, as I said, just waning in the last couple of years, he's had an incredible career. He'll finish with 88 tests. He talked about it in two halves. So until the SCG in 2022, he had played 44 tests, and then he was recalled and he played another 44 tests. So, it has been quite the renaissance. The first half of his career was very stop-start. He was dropped a lot of times, and he made reference to that in the press conference and how difficult it was. And we'll get to some of his commentary around the racial prejudices that he spoke about. But, he was in and out of the side for a while. He talked about being dropped in the subcontinent against spin bowlers and then coming back and now being a gun in the subcontinent, doing so well in Sri Lanka, India, Pakistan. He's made himself into one of the best players of spin bowling in the country. Is probably Steve Smith, then him. So it has been quite the turnaround. It was interesting. I think this is a really good insight into the sort of stubbornness that drives top athletes. Now, Khawaja made those comments about, being dropped a lot and being perceived as not being able to play spin bowling and then coming back and dominating. And actually, Usman Khawaja gave a lot of credit to Justin Langer for backing him in Dubai in 2017, saying in 2018, sorry, at the end of that year where Khawaja batted out the test match and made that huge 100 to save a match in stifling hot conditions. And Khawaja said Langer was the one that told me, you can play spin bowling. I've seen you smash spinners at shield level. This is a myth that you can't play spin bowling. And it was Langer backing Khawaja that turned his game around against spin. And it's interesting how, despite the Aussie team pushing Langer out, his effects have lingered on for years afterwards. And I just wonder what other coaches have that such intense effect on players. I mean, Mitchell Stark's transformed his career, and Langer started that. He pushed Stark into developing a stock ball. But anyway, back to Khawaja. So he mentioned the subcontinental issue in his press conference. Then Smith today, talking about Khawaja, made a point of saying, and this is what I love, Smith is a wonderful competitor. But in my few little interactions with Smith, you just get this sort of stubbornness about him. Like, he's a very stubborn guy, and he's very confident in his own ability. And so his stubbornness, Steve Smith said in his press conference today that when he dropped Khawaja, when Smith was captain, they dropped Khawaja on the subcontinent. And he said that may have been a blessing in disguise, that it made Khawaja go back and reinvent his game against spin and develop the sweep shot. So I just thought it was interesting how Smith wanted to get on record that he didn't feel he'd fucked around Khawaja. In fact, he feels he'd pushed him to become a better player of spin bowling. That gives you an inkling of the sort of drive that Steve Smith has at his core. Some people do better at hiding it, but if you get close to Smith, you do realize he's very stubborn and very, very confident and won't often admit he's wrong. So anyway, very, very good stuff. So that was Smith today. So, and then, Khawaja talked about some highlights in his career, the defining twin centuries at the SCG when he came back in 2022 when Travis had COVID, and he made those centuries batting at 5 and then went up to Open from there, and had such a good run from there, went to Pakistan, went to the World Test Championship final, went to India, went on the 2023 Ashes and dominated all of them, was part of that team that won the World Test Championship final against India. He also talked about his defining innings at Edgbaston, where he batted on every day of the test match, and Australia won that famous victory where Cummins and Lyon chased down the runs at the end. It was interesting. Khawaja gave himself a lot of credit for anchoring that innings. That's one thing that Khawaja's not shy about doing, is giving himself credit for stuff. And he also talked about, his pride in being an opener late in his career, how difficult that is mentally. So good stuff from Khawaja. I have to say, as I said, one of the more powerful, interesting press conferences. I don't often agree with Khawaja's point of view, but I do appreciate him being so forthright, being so open. I think his views on, I would just say, I hope he doesn't go into politics, because God help us all if he does. But apart from that, let me just go on to something he said about, so there was some quite pointed criticism of the former players after the incident in Perth where his back went. And since then, so Khawaja came out and said, let me play this audio and then we'll discuss it.
I've also felt very different in a lot of respects, different by the way I've been treated, different for how things have happened. Something that's been on my mind probably from the start of the series that I noticed, which I thought I'd kind of gone past before, and it was when I did my back. I hurt my back, I had back spasms, and it was something I couldn't control. And the way, I don't want to say you specifically, but the way the media and the past players came out and attacked me, I could have copped it for 2 days, but I copped it for about 5 days straight. And the way everyone came at me about my preparation, and it was quite personal in terms of, things like, he's not committed to the team. He was only worried about himself. He played this golf comp the day before. He's selfish. he doesn't train hard enough. He didn't train the day before the game. He's lazy. These are the same stereotypes, the racial stereotypes I've grown up with my whole life. These are the same racial stereotypes I've been handling my whole life. I just thought that the media and the old players and everyone else had moved past him. But we obviously haven't fully moved past him, because I've never seen anyone being treated like that in the Australian cricket team before. For the performances, yeah, but not for the uncontrollables the way you guys went at me. And, you know, that was the thing that disappointed me the most, because I thought we were past that. But there's still a little bit out there which I still have to fight every single day, which is the frustrating thing for me. I can give you countless number of guys who've played golf the day before and been injured. You guys haven't said a thing. No one else said a thing. I can give you even more probably responsive guys who've had 15 schooners the night before and then gotten injured. No one said a word. That's all right. They're just being Aussie larrikins, right? They're just being lads.
Well, Khawaja, they're very strident in his defence of himself and also criticising the former players for what he perceives as racial bias. So since then, Jason Gillespie has come out as one of those former players that criticised him and said that the criticisms of Khawaja had merit and they weren't based on racial bias. They were just legitimate criticisms. So it's really interesting, because I'm glad I didn't record this podcast yesterday. It's given me a lot of time to think about Khawaja's press conference. And what I reflect on is how influential Khawaja's upbringing is in shaping his personality. And I don't think I've seen social media criticism of Khawaja. Some people seem to get riled up by his commentary, which I do sometimes as well, I guess. But the thing is with Khawaja, I think his experience of coming to Australia as a young Muslim immigrant from Pakistan, and definitely, there is no doubt he would have come up against prejudice and racism at all levels, not just in cricket, but in Australian society, growing up, becoming accepted, and that is going to shape you. Those early experiences are going to mold you. So he would have, as I said, I played a lot of cricket. He would have no doubt in the western suburbs of Sydney copped a ton of awful racial vilification on cricket fields and off cricket fields, and he would have had to fight and scrap for everything. So I get that shapes the way you see the world, and I don't want to dismiss that, because that is a powerful experience. I've never been in that situation. My family immigrated here a long time ago. In 1938, my dad's family came here. So I've always felt an immigrant in some ways, but not in the way he has. So I can't know what it's like to come up against that every day, and therefore how that is going to affect the way you see the world. So I look back at that criticism from Perth, and I am ensconced in the press box. I know most of those former cricketers I've had on the podcast who've criticised Khawaja. I know a lot of the journos who've written those articles. I know there is no conscious racial bias. Absolutely, that is just wrong. For Khawaja to say that it was a racial bias, I think was a step too far. And I think to accuse the former players and media of doing that was wrong. But are there racial biases he's subjected to every day on social media? Yes. Are there subconscious bias maybe from people? Potentially, absolutely. But I don't think there's any racial bias in that criticism of what happened in Perth. It was literally due to his performances as a cricketer. And I think it is typical of Khawaja's arrogance to boil it down to that. Like I am willing to concede, as I said, this is his experience, but he can't come out and just say, you know what, I wasn't able to do my job for whatever reason. I'm open to criticism. He should just take it on the chin, just take the criticism on the chin and move on. But he can't do that. He has to push back. So there was absolutely no racial tones to it. And actually, I think if you go back through history, it's not really a prejudice or a racial prejudice. Sometimes players, unfortunately, just get those kind of lazy-ish labels. I mean, I think of Mark Waugh. Mark Waugh, when he was playing, was always perceived as being a bit casual, a bit airy-fairy. He would throw his wicket away. Now, and he was often compared to his brother, where Steve actually, put a big price on his wicket. Whereas Mark Waugh, at the end of his career, used to say that really upset him because he was working just as hard as his brother, but maybe it didn't look that way. So I think sometimes players can get labelled certain things like being lazy or being too casual or whatever. But I don't think in this case, going back to Perth, that Khawaja was singled out because he's a brown Muslim boy who immigrated here from Pakistan. And I think what that tells me is how much that early experience of being that brown Muslim boy from Pakistan has shaped him as a man. And, I just have to accept that on the chin, like, okay, that's his experience. It's probably very difficult coming and immigrating to a new country and being Muslim in Australia. So I try to be sympathetic then. So I guess I try to be empathetic to that experience now with Khawaja. As I said, I don't agree with what he said, and I think if I'm a former player, I'm not happy with being painted as basically a racist because I criticised him for not being able to open the batting in Perth. So yeah, I don't think he needed to go there, but boy, he went in a lot of places. As I said, he talked about how Israel doesn't represent the Jews, how Saudi Arabia doesn't, and ISIS doesn't represent the Muslims. I mean, I could probably do like a whole podcast series just on that exit interview. But I'm also glad it's not just me, like all the media and the journalists. And, it's been pretty unanimously discussed as one of the more powerful retirement press conferences in recent memory. So that's it, really. That's the end of Khawaja's career. He goes out on his own terms. He'll have played 88 tests, and I hope he does well. I don't know what he's going to do post-career. He said he wants to play a lot of golf, and then he said, you can't criticize me. No one's criticizing you for playing golf when you're retired. I don't think anyone would have any problem with that. Maybe don't play golf 4 days before the opening Ashes test. And then when you get criticized for that, don't then accuse those people of being racist. I don't know. That could be something you do in the future. But that was Usman Khawaja. Yeah, his family was there, his kids, his mum, his dad, his brother. Some interesting comments about his brother in the chat. So yeah, quite an occasion. All right, so moving on from Usman Khawaja, let's hope he scores some runs and goes out. I'm sure, look, I want to say, because I've criticized him for this, right? He said he calls himself the people's champ because he represents the people that are struggling, that are underprivileged, that are, he wants to be the inspiration to another brown Muslim boy or woman who wants to play for Australia. So again, normally people dub you the people's champ, like you don't give yourself that nickname. Anyway, interesting cat. I've always thought you don't get to the top of cricket, like be a good batter as Khawaja is, unless you've got like a bit of arrogance about you. Like most batters, you need a bit of arrogance to go out there and face someone bowling at 140 clicks at your head sometimes. I talked about Smith before, he's stubborn, he's arrogant, he loves a fight more than anybody. But anyway, let's get on to previewing the fifth test at the SCG. So I'm in Sydney. It has been grey and rainy for the last 5 days. There's been hardly any sun, bits and pieces, no sun, but it's been very overcast, grey skies. So I just wonder what the hell is going to happen when the game starts tomorrow. We could be in for another quick test. I've seen pictures of I was out on the ground yesterday because it was the McGrath Pink Day launch, and so I got fairly close to the wicket, but it looks green. It looks fairly flat. It's not going to have the sort of thatchy complexion that the MCG pitch had, but this could be another quick test, unfortunately. Todd Greenberg will be pulling his hair out. In fact, if I'm Todd Greenberg, just go and get on the roller tonight. Like, I actually think curators leading up to a test match should be on a 24-hour clock. I don't think they should be allowed to sleep. Or it should be like, shift work. So there's always someone ready to roll the pitch if it stops raining. And, if you get to the night before the test and you're like, this pitch needs 8 hours of rolling, then you're there all night. Like, what is more important than test cricket? Nothing, really. So I don't understand why there's not 24-hour care given to our pitchers. A bit like nurses. They're on 24-hour shifts. They don't just go to bed at night and tell sick people to go and look after themselves, and doctors, of course. So yeah, I think there needs to be 24-hour care. And if I'm Todd Greenberg, just get the roller tonight and just hammer it. Just up and down, up and down, up and down. Adam Lewis spoke, the groundskeeper, and said he hopes for an evening covering of grass and he wants an even contest between bat and ball. There's a few whispers around. Maybe Australia could replace Green with Webster. Maybe Green and Webster are both going to play. If it's Green, they're not going to play Murphy at all. They're going with Green, Webster, and the three quicks, Nisa, Boland, and Stark, and Murphy still sits out. So I think there's a few things up in the air. Steve Smith, when he did his press conference today, said he hadn't seen the pitch yet today, and they were going to probably wait until tomorrow to decide on the team. But there is a fear that Boland and Stark are pretty cooked by now, and maybe having Webster and Green is good backup to just bowl through a lot of overs and use them as your strike bowlers. For England, so they've called in Matthew Potts for Gus Atkinson, and they haven't, and Shoaib Bashir's come into the squad, but they haven't announced their 11 yet. So I guess perhaps Bashir could play for Jacks or one of the quicks starting tomorrow, or even they move Jacks up the order. I don't know who for, and then they just plug Bashir in down the bottom. But it's supposed to be sort of grey and cloudy tomorrow in Sydney and a bit rainy, actually. The forecast for the first day of the SCG test is not good. So that actually could get it. I mean, if they get enough play tomorrow that CA doesn't have to refund the tickets, and then they maybe can get into the fourth and fifth day that way. But yeah, so I think it's going to be a pretty bowler-friendly test match. And just on the pink test, remember the third day is the McGrath day, the Jane McGrath day, and you can get your virtual seats this year. So pinktest.com.au, you can get your virtual seats, and it's amazing what they do. There's 343 McGrath cancer care nurses, and they support, and they've supported 167,000 families across the country since 2005. So get your virtual seat now. You can get them now. Get it now. You don't even have to wait to the third day. All right, I'm going to take a quick break for those listening on the podcast, and then I'll be back to look at Australia's T20 squad. You're listening to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I am Menners, and a few more things to get to. I've got a bumper, can't let it go. I'm going to have a little bit of a look at last year's test stats, a couple of bits of news as well. But before I get into that, since the last podcast, Australia have announced their T20 squad for the upcoming World Cup. That starts in early February. Australia will be looking to win their second T20 World Cup after winning in 2021 in Dubai. And I think there's a lot on this tournament. Australia have had some disappointing T20 World Cup campaigns recently. So this one is a good opportunity for them to actually go deep into the tournament. The last one was a disaster. All right, so let's look at the squad that Australia have announced. And I actually will go through it player by player because normally the Australian T20 side changes so much. It's very hard to keep track of who's in the team. So Mitch Marsh is captaining. Interesting inclusion. Xavier Bartlett's got the call up. And I thought perhaps his batting might have edged him out over a few other cricketers, maybe Sean Abbott or even Ben Dwarshuis. Xavier Bartlett, younger, they see a big future for him, but also very handy down the order. I mean, I'm recording this the day after he helped win a Brisbane Heat, a Big Bash game with the bat. He's done that in franchises in the Major League Cricket. He's done it as well. So he can hold the bat. Xavier Bartlett, Cooper Connolly, he's having a breakout Big Bash, and I've spoken about his talent before on this podcast. So I like that they've got, obviously, these two younger players in there. Pat Cummins under an injury cloud, but they expect him to be fit. Tim David has a hamstring injury, missing the Big Bash, but again, they expect him to be fit. Cameron Green, who performed so well for Australia in the West Indies at the top of the order in the T20 side. Nathan Ellis, we know how good he is in the death overs, and with Mitchell Stark now retiring from T20 cricket, can imagine Ellis will take a much more prominent place in Australia's 11. Josh Hazlewood, well, don't need to say how good he is. He's probably the best T20 bowler at the moment behind Jasper Bumrah. You know, Travis Head, Josh Inglis is the only keeper, so Australia aren't taking a spare keeper. I thought Alex Carey might sneak into the squad as a batter keeper because he's been in such good form. But if Inglis goes down on match day, I'll probably have to stick Maxwell with the gloves. Matthew Kuhneman's the backup spinner to Zampa. I think there's a chance in India you could play Kuhneman and Zampa, But I think ideally Australia will go Zampa and Maxwell to bowl the spin overs. But on a real turning deck, Kuhneman's a good option. I've seen him bowl really well for the Heat at the SCG a few times. And I just wonder if, for example, Zampa were to go down or get injured, Kuhneman's your man to jump in there. Matt Short's in the squad. He's probably not going to play in the 11. And then here's a bit of a surprise. Marcus Stoinis is in the squad. And I think this is a crafty selection because we know how much cricket Stoinis has played on the subcontinent in the IPL. But and he did well in Australia's last T20 World Cup. But at what point do Australia move on from Maxwell and Stoinis and bring a few younger all-rounders in? So Mitchell Owen didn't make this squad. I guess, Stoinis and Owen might have been sort of up against each other when you're looking at who's going to make that final 15. And I think Mitchell Owen not having a great Big Bash probably didn't help. And the fact that Stoinis is a T20 gun for hire, plays so much IPL cricket, probably just got him over the line. Yeah, it's a conservative selection, but in line with what George Bailey and the selectors have done in all teams. They tend to back experience and back prior performances. Adam Zampa, the final member of that squad. So I guess Bartlett and Connolly, the bolters, two spinners, a couple of unlucky players. Ben Dwarshuis was unlucky in 2025. He took 15 wickets for Australia in T20 cricket and at 9 runs per over, one of the leading wicket takers for Australia in that year. The only players that took more were Ellis and Zampa. So maybe Dwarshuis is unlucky not to be there. If you're looking at who you would put him in for, maybe it's a Bartlett. To give you that left arm variety. So he can count himself unlucky. Obviously, Spencer Johnson's been injured for most of this series, so Spojo's not in contention. And as I said, Mitchell Owen missed out. He did play 13 games for Australia and did pretty well. He bats at the top of the order for the Hurricanes, but he bats down the order, batted down the order for Australia in 2025 and played 13 games. So, I think he's unlucky, Mitchell Owen. Even could he have slid in ahead of Cooper Connolly? Anyway, that's the Australian T20 side that will go and compete for the tournament. It's a 20-team tournament starting in February. And we'll do more extensive previews of that. Once the actions is over, we'll really be sort of focusing on the build-up to that T20 World Cup. And, it's quite a significant portion of the Australian CV because if they can win the T20 World Cup, what were the 2023 50-over world champions would be the T20 World Cup champions and would be ranked number 1 test side, I think. Yeah, I think we're still number 1, although South Africa are world test champions. Also, moving on, Brett Lee has been inducted into the Australian Cricket Hall of Fame, and he said some lovely words on the ABC. And he's very humble and he thanked his family for support. Brett Lee played 76 test matches for Australia, claimed 310 wickets. He also was a gun at one-day international level, taking 380 wickets in 221 one-day international matches. And he also played some T20 cricket right at the beginning of the Big Bash and played for the Sixers when they won the inaugural Big Bash title. He also won a few World Cups for Australia, most notably 2003 and 2007. So with Brett Lee being inducted into the Hall of Fame, I don't think you'd call him a great test bowler. I think you'd call him a great one-day bowler, very good test bowler, that extra pace to really hurry up batters. But he sort of averaged around that 30. So let's not kid ourselves. He wasn't a great test bowler, very good one. But I have to say, as a person, he is a terrific professional. I actually, when I was playing, he was at Mossman. This is a long time ago. He and his brother Shane were at Mossman, and we also had same coach Barry Knight for a while. So I've said on this podcast, one of the things that ended my cricket career was being in the nets at Mossman and facing Brett Lee, and that would have been in 97 or 98, so a year or so before his test debut. So he wasn't that young, and he was bowling very quick. I was in the nets, and he was bowling, and Jeff Thompson was coaching him, and Jeff Thompson was also bowling to me And at that point, I decided cricket's not that much fun, actually, facing Brett Lee. But yeah, terrific guy. You know, I've done some professional commentary with him, and he is so humble, so lovely, not arrogant at all. The way he carries himself, he's a consummate gentleman. You know, his brother Shane was a great guy as well. So he definitely deserves to be in the Australian Cricket Hall of Fame because what he did in one-day international cricket, and he was also one of the most marketable figures in the game for a number of years. He broke down a lot of barriers with the subcontinent and he embraced the subcontinent. So congratulations to him, a fine representative of Australia. All right. Just one thing I wanted to shout out. In 2025, there were some notable stats, but Mitchell Starc registered the best ever bowling strike rate in a year of Test cricket. So Mitchell Starc, he took his wickets at 28.3. So he took the most wickets in the year. He took 55 Test wickets at 28.3. Quite unbelievable. Second on the year was 43 wickets for Mohammad Siraj. And if you go down, the next Australian was Scotty Boland with 32 wickets at the average of 15. Geez, he had a good year too. And then if you go down, Lyon is next with 29 wickets. And then Cummins, who only played 6 Test matches in 2025 for Australia. Obviously injured for the Ashes, missed Sri Lanka. So not a lot of Cummins. When he did play, he did take his wickets at 16.53. But Mitchell Starc, the leading wicket taker in all Test cricket in 2025. Mohammad Siraj, number 2. In most runs in 2025, all up, Shubman Gill scored the most runs for the world. In the world for India, 983. But second was Travis Head with 817 runs. So, you know, up and down year with Head, but when he gets going, he makes it count, 200s, 350s. And then the next Australian is Carey with 767 runs. He's 6 on that list of Test run scorers for the year. So great year for the South Australians, Head and Carey. And then next Aussie, you go down to Steve Smith, who's 651 runs of the year. So that's 2025, the year that was. You have to say Head and Starc, the 2 leaders for Australia. Head with the runs, Starc with the wickets, 2 left-handers. The highest score, I forgot about this, the highest score in Test cricket in 2025 was Wian Mulder's 367 not out for Zimbabwe. Sorry, for South Africa versus Zimbabwe. That's where he declared, and he could have broken Lara's record. Shubman Gill's 269 is next. And best figures for the year were for the West Indies, Warwick took 7 for 32 versus Pakistan way back in January 2025. All right, so that is it. I've now got Can't Let It Go, but, you know, I've wrapped up Usman Khawaja's press conference. I have previewed the SCG test. Australia looking to go 4-1 up, and I think that will be appropriate. You know, there's been a lot of talk about the gap between the two sides. I think if Australia can go ahead and win this game, 4-1 would be the appropriate scoreline, and send these Baz ballers back with their tail between their legs. It actually would be pretty awful if Baz and Stokes got to walk off the SCG winners. So let's hope that doesn't happen. Let's send Khawaja into retirement, a winner. Let's put our stamp on the series. And there we go. All right, Can't Let It Go. Couple of things. Firstly, Shaheen Shah Afridi is out of the Big Bash. He's got injured, so unfortunately he won't be around for the back end of it. Big blow for them. Unfortunately, I've got a bit of a guilty confession. I haven't been able to watch much of the Big Bash this summer yet with the Ashes and all that's been going on. Kind of been laser focused. I have obviously had the Big Bash on, but I wouldn't say I've been, you know, really into it this year. But once the Test match is over, I'll be locked in on the Big Bash and the T20 World Cup. It'll be a change of pace. Get right into the T20 game. Talks about having a drink at the end of the series. Travis Head spoke to Dan Cherney and said he's hoping the two teams have a drink at the end of the series. I hope they do, because we all know what assholes Stokes and Baz were at the end of the last Ashes, how they sooked like little fucking babies, little fucking crybabies because Alex Carey stumped Johnny Bear. So let's hope that sort of shenanigans doesn't carry on. Travis Head said he's good mates with Will Jacks. I think they played together in the subcontinent and now their partners are good friends. So I think it's Travis Head's wife. So let's hope the Aussies and the English have a beer at the end of the series, because, you know, the game is bigger than these petty things. The game has always been bigger than these petty things. And your responsibility as Test cricketers of Australia, you're caretakers of the game. This is what Bradman and Benno used to say. It's your responsibility to hand it down to the next generation with these traditions intact. So, yeah, I hope they have a drink at the end of the series. A couple of other things. There's been some comments here that the grey cricket and the final word have been mentioning me in the shows. I don't listen to them, so if you've got time codes or links, please send them to me. The Great War with Adam Collins is over. We've buried the hatchet, so no problems there. Haven't seen the grey cricketers around, but I'll probably see them at the SCG test. And for old fans of the show, I saw Jaleesa Apps for the first time in 2 years at the Usman Khawaja retirement press conference. I know some of the listeners missed Jaleesa. It was fine, a little frosty, but it was nice to see her. She's a very, very lovely person, and she does great work at Channel 7. She's a gun reporter, does mainly rugby league. But yeah, saw her for the first time in 2 years. So that's how things have been on that front. All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning into the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I'll be back after every day of the Sydney test. They won't actually be quite as snappy as the other ones because I'll be at the ground and have to go outside of the ground and record, and you can't really do them live. So they'll be a bit later, but I will have been at the ground and I would have been at the press conferences. So they'll be worth the wait. Remember, you can get your Cricket Unfiltered merchandise. The link is in the episode notes. You've got your Johnny Bairstow run out stumping t-shirts. You've got your moral victory t-shirts. You've got your Baz and Stokes unemployment line t-shirts. So go into the link in the episode notes. Don't forget to rate and review the podcast on your favorite app. But thanks everybody for tuning into the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. Fingers crossed that the rain doesn't spoil day one of the SCG test. But, I'll be back to review every day from the Sydney Cricket Ground.